Hi there, this is Evan here, Molendinarius from latinum.org.uk, and you can find my extensive audio catalogue over there at latinum.org.uk. It's hosted on Patreon, and it's a subscription service, so there's over 10 years of Latin audio recorded there, Latin courses, Latin audiobooks, etc. What I am recording now is the continuation of a presentation on botanical Latin. And in this video, we're going to look at the noun. So I'm going to assume you don't know any Latin, and in terms of pronunciation, I'll be using the classical pronunciation of Latin. So a noun is the name of a thing, a person, a place, or quality. So things like plant or England, air, knowledge, beauty, things like that. An abstract noun is something you can't put in a wheelbarrow, so you can't put beauty in a wheelbarrow. A skyscraper is a concrete noun. You still can't put it in a wheelbarrow, but you could imagine putting it in one if it was big enough. So a generic name is also a noun. So Latin nouns have number. They are singular or plural, just like in English. So we have fish, and then we have fish, or fishes, depending, in English. Gender, that's masculine nouns, feminine nouns, and neuter nouns. And we also have common nouns, which have indeterminate gender. And the nouns can, some nouns are not, but most nouns in Latin are declined. And they are declined by changing the ending of the word, and this then gives different meanings and shows the connections between that word and other words in the sentence. And these endings of nouns have a technical name in English. We call them cases. And there are 5 main groups of nouns, principal groups, under which there are subcategories. But there are 5 main categories of nouns, which are called the 5 declensions. And we call them the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth declensions in English. In other countries, they sometimes call them after their endings in the genitive, the possessive case. Nouns of each declension form their word endings, their cases, in the same way when they are declined. So once you know what declension a noun is in, then you know the pattern for that noun. And the various endings are attached to what's called the stem of the word. And this stem is the core. I cut myself washing the dishes about 5 days ago. No good deed goes unpunished, but luckily I didn't cut through any tendons or anything like that. I did have an x-ray. But anyway, that's nothing to do with that. Various endings are attached to the stem of the word, the core, the basic package, which contains its core meaning. And the stem of the noun is derived differently according to the declension of the noun. So, to decline a noun fully is to write down all of the various endings. You list all its forms in all of its cases, and you do it in both singular and in plural. And it seems like an awful lot of stuff to learn, but if you, as I recommend highly, listen to a lot of Latin, or read a lot of Latin, but in the beginning, when you're first starting, it's actually hard to read a lot of Latin. It's much easier to listen to loads and loads of it, even if you don't completely understand all of it. Or if you listen to my recordings which go Latin, English, Latin, backwards and forwards, you'll start to pick this up, your brain will start to build the patterns. And of course you can learn it formally as well with flashcards and what have you. So the stem of a noun is derived differently according to its declension, and to decline a noun fully is to list all of its forms for all of the cases, whether they are singular or plural. Right? And within each declension there are 6 cases, and these are arranged in different orders in different textbooks. Some people get really hung up on the order of the cases. I don't think it's actually important. I think when you're learning, you should actually try to mix and match the cases and get flexibility. But Makes it more difficult, but you get better at the language that way. So there are 6 cases for practical purposes, but for botanical Latin, you only need to know 5 of them because you're not going to, unless you are Prince Charles, talk to your plants. There is a case which is used when you are talking to someone. So if you really are of the school that you should talk to your plants, then you might want to learn the vocative case as well. And there are 2 numbers, singular when there's just 1, and plural when there are 2 or more plants in front of you. And the case endings are changed to indicate the plural form. Unfortunately for you as a learner of Latin in the beginning, some case endings are used more than once with different meanings in the language, and they're context dependent. Of course, as you get on with the language and you know what's going on, this doesn't really present much of a problem, but at the beginning it is tricky. So the cases, the nominative case, this is used when the noun is the subject of the sentence, the thing that's doing the action, the thing that we're talking about. The bus traveled down the street, we're talking about the bus, therefore the bus is nominative. We use sentence here in the sense of a group of words that's got a full stop at the end. And normally a sentence must include a verb, but in botanical Latin, the verb is often omitted due to its telegraphic style. Accusative case, used when the noun is the object of the sentence or after a noun in a compound sentence, and often used with a preposition. So, it's the thing that we are talking about rather than the thing that's the main core of the sentence. So, give me, well, it's not a good example. I see the book. So I see, what am I seeing? I'm seeing the book. So the book is in the accusative case. It's the thing that is being seen. The genitive case has various meanings and gradations of meaning, but primarily is also called the possessive case in some of the older textbooks. It's the case of, the surface of a leaf. Also given in English by apostrophe S, the leaf's surface. This is the possessive apostrophe S. Not to be confused with the apostrophe in English, which is used to show that a letter is missing. For example, when you say won't, for example, and you have an apostrophe there, that's indicating that letters are missing. Isn't, with an apostrophe indicating letters are missing. So the apostrophe in English of the possession is different to the apostrophe of the missing letter, which of course causes all kinds of problem with the words it and its for a lot of people, where its means it is. Dative. Dative, the giving case, indicates to something or for something, usually. So A is related to or similar to B. B is related to or similar to C. C is related to or similar to D, and so on and so on. But not when things are moving or when something is acting. So joined to the stem, because that's like joined to the stem, there's an action there, that's the accusative. It also indicates sometimes possession. Mihi, to me. Nobis, to us. So you would say est mihi, it is to me, penna, a pen, for example. So that's also used as the dative, and that's a particular idiomatic form in Latin. Ablative. So ablative indicates ideas of by, with, from, in something. So, for example, something with an apiculum, something with horns, something written by Linnaeus. Now, the declensions. In the examples, we're going to use botanical terms, and also I recommend you look at Stern, which you can look at on archive.org, and his examples. And here we go. So, the first declension. When you look up Latin for a noun, always examine and check not only the number of the declension, but also its gender. Because if you're going to add adjectives or whatever, these need to agree with the noun, which means that they have to match the gender. So if you have a feminine noun, you need a feminine adjective. And sometimes your feminine noun won't look feminine. It may look like something else, but still, if it is feminine, it needs to have a feminine adjective or descriptor of whatever it is. So if you had, say, example, green leaves, and leaves was a feminine word, then the word green would have to have its feminine form. If you used the white books, and books for argument's sake was neuter in English, and English doesn't have genders, then you would have to use the neuter form for the word white. None of this exists in English, and so it's a bit foreign. Usually, gender is indicated by the ending of the nominative case of a noun, but not always. So there are exceptions. And also, nouns in the first declension are usually feminine, but not always. And one way of finding out whether a noun is feminine or masculine is to look at the diminutive, because the diminutive will always take a regular form, and then you'll know. For example, the word for a sailor, nauta, looks feminine, but is actually masculine. And if you look at the diminutive form, you'll see it ends in us, the typical masculine ending. So there is the recommendation that for those nouns that are confusing in their gender, I recommend you learn the diminutive. That's the form for the smallest thing of that type. So here is our example, macula. Macula is a feminine word, it's a spot. The letter C in classical Latin is always pronounced hard like a K, K, macula. So M-A-C-U-L-A, macula. Macula, spot. So the nominative is macula, macula. In the typical English pronunciation of Latin, you say macula. Macula, but that pronunciation, which was used by botanists, is pretty much extinct everywhere except for in the world of botany in England. I recommend the classical pronunciation. Macula, a spot, the spot, when it's the subject of a sentence. The accusative, maculam, notice that the M on the end is sort of a nasalized A, so that kind of sound. Maculam, you may want to slightly strengthen it at the beginning or make it weak, but it's not maculam with a M like that. It's maculam with a sort of a nasal sound sort of up here. Maculam. Genitive, the possessive case, maculai, maculai. The dative, the giving case, also maculai, maculai. And the ablative, macula. Now note that the ablative has a long vowel on the end, macula. If you accentuate that and lengthen it slightly longer than necessary, it will help you to distinguish macula from the nominative, macula in the ablative. So macula, the spot, maculam, I see a maculam, a genitive, maculai, of a spot, the dative, maculai, to a spot, for a spot, and the ablative, macula, by means of a spot, with the spot, from a spot. And the plural of this is, for the nominative, maculai, spots. so the subject of a sentence, maculae. Maculas, spots, when it's the object of the verb, maculas. Macularum, of the spots. Notice the long A in arum. Macularum, of the spots. Maculis, to or for the spots. Notice the long I on the ending there. Maculis, maculis. And maculis for the ablative, by or with or from the spots. Maculis. So those are the case endings for the first declension. Here is, and that's a feminine word. Here's a masculine word, agricola. So the diminutive is agriculus. Agriculus ending in us, which is the typical masculine ending. Agricola, masculine, it's a field dweller or a field worker, a farmer, that kind of thing. So sometimes used for plants as well. Nominative, agricola, so the field dweller, the thing that lives in the field, the agricultural person, right? Agricola, subject. The accusative, agricolam, agricolam. The genitive, agricolae, agricolae. Notice that the AE diphthong is pronounced I, agricolae. The dative, agricolae. And the ablative, agricola, agricola. And the meanings are agricola, the field dweller or the field inhabitant. The agricolam, translated in English the same way, the field dweller or inhabitant as the object of a sentence. The genitive possessive of a field inhabitant, agricolae, and the dative to or for the inhabitant of a field, agricolae, and the ablative agricola, by the inhabitant of a field, or agricola with the inhabitant of a field, or agricola from the inhabitant of a field. And then we go over and do the same thing again in the plural. So, agricolae is the field dwellers as the subject. Agricolas, the field dwellers or the field inhabitants as the object. Agricolarum, of the field dwellers, this is the genitive, the possessive case. Agricolis, to the field dwellers or for the field dwellers or inhabitants. And agricolis, by the field inhabitants, or agricolis with the field inhabitants, or agricolis from the field inhabitants, and that's the ablative. So that's a first declension noun, masculine. Note that the main part of this noun, macul, for the first word, and agricole, for the second word, remains the same throughout, and this is called the stem of the word. So, not to be confused with the stem of a plant, although it is of course part of the noun to which the other parts are attached. It doesn't have leaves or thorns, although you may think it's a very thorny thing. In nouns of the first declension, the stem is usually the nominative of the noun without its final letter. Usually, but not always. And note that some endings are the same for different cases. You will have seen that already or heard it while I was doing this. This is less of a problem when you are translating into Latin, which is what most botanists do, because then you can determine the appropriate ending and you can use it. When you are translating from Latin into your target language, however, then you have to determine the case from the position of the word in the sentence, if you can, and any associated words by the context, in other words. So in terms of getting your Latin right, it's easier to get it right when you are producing Latin than when you are translating out of it, especially if the person you are translating from has made a mistake, which, if you're reading Botanical Latin, is not that unlikely to be the case. So, many names of what are called genera, or genera in the classical pronunciation, ending in the letter A, are declined like the word macula. And you very seldom would need to decline them unless you're comparing one genus with another. But you can avoid this by abbreviating them with the capital letters, provided your meaning is unambiguous. So you can get around these problems many times. Geographical names often end in the letter A. Britannia, Germania, Franco-Gallia, and they are also declined in this way. Italia, although a botanist doesn't often have to decline these names. And of course, not in the plural. There's only one Britannia. There's only one Italia. Feminine personal names are declined in the first declension. And words ending in cola, which means an inhabitant, are often used as specific little additions to words. So we have saxicola, something that lives in the rocks, saxicola. Nivicola, something that lives in the snow. Notice that the letter V is pronounced W, nivicola, in classical Latin. Planticola, something that lives in plants. In other words, it's an epiphyte. And when it's used in this way, then they are used as nouns in apposition. Their gender is common, masculine, feminine, or neuter. And it doesn't matter what the gender of the generic name is. They are all declined like Agricola above. Then we have nouns of Greek origin. Those ending in letter E are first declension. And they have different case endings because they are Greek. And they are used in botany in the singular. Now, in terms of pronunciation of the Greek, there are many disputes about how to go about doing this. My preferred pronunciation of the Greek is what's called the Koine pronunciation, which is the pronunciation that was used at the time the Romans were speaking their classical Latin. And much of the Greek that's come into English comes into English with this pronunciation scheme. So, pseudoraphe and generic names such as aloe, anemone, and microchete are Greek. So, micropyle, which we would say in English micropyle, micropyle, the letter Y is pronounced E. It's sort of like a Greek sound, or the French E sound. Micropyle, or you could just say micropyle. So, in the Old English pronunciation, micropyle. So the nominative, micropyle, is the subject of the sentence. Micropyle, this is a feminine noun. The accusative, micropölen, as an object. So where the Latin would have an M on the end, this has an N on the end, and it's pronounced more clearly. Micropölen. The genitive, micropöles, of a micropyle, micropöles. The dative, 2 or 4 micropyle, micropölae. And the ablative, by, with, or from a micropyle, micropöle. So this is the Greek declension. And that's the first declension. We'll stop there. I think that's 24 minutes of Latin in one go. That's quite enough. And to do all the declensions in one section would be a bit too much, I think. So that's nouns and the first declension. And I hope that's somewhat helpful. if you really want to get to grips with Latin, of course, I highly recommend that you study a proper course. If you like using audio materials in an accompaniment with a textbook, which of course is useful if you want to get your pronunciation good, then I highly recommend you go to latinum.org.uk and subscribe there to access the substantial audio catalogue that I've built up there over the last 10 years, and I'm still working on it regularly. Right, wale, bye.